Tell me a little bit about your mom and dad.
Rose and Tony Teresi. My dad was a immigrant, came here at the age of 5 years old from Sicily. My grandfather and his teenage kid brother came here from Sicily a few weeks after my dad was born and left him in the care of my grandmother and the extended family. They came here and worked for 5 years and got citizenship, jobs, a house here in the city, and then sent for my grandfather, or my father and my grandmother. And he came here as a 5-year-old little boy and met his father as he came out of Ellis Island with my grandmother. And my father used to tell the story about how he felt his mother's hand slipping from his and her running and hugging and kissing this man that he'd never seen before, and then bringing him over to introduce him to his father. And that's a wow story, but it's even more wow when you stop to think it happened millions of times over the years. My mom's family came from Sicily. She was a terrific homemaker and caretaker for me and my sisters, and my dad was a supermarket manager at the old Loblaws chain here in the city. So, and then after his retirement, he went on to get elected 8 times and serve 8 terms in the Chautauqua County Legislature as a retiree. So, come from just a good working class South Side neighborhood, corner of Cole and Prospect, Fletcher Elementary School. Like you, a grad of Jefferson Junior High School, Jamestown High School, and then on with the rest of my life.
Did your dad talk at all about why they left Italy?
Obviously, there was family security issues there. There was a lot going on. Poverty, and came to the United States, as did some of their other relatives from the town that they were from, a town called Thermony, a small city about 45, 50 miles from Palermo, of about 25, 30,000 people. And they came here to pursue a better life and get jobs and pursue the American dream.
A tremendous amount of political turmoil in that time period. Did they get caught up in that?
I don't know. Over in Sicily, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I have heard stories since from other relatives that things with organized crime were quite hot and heavy back in the 1920s. My grandfather came here in 1923. My dad came over here in 1928 with my grandmother, and I have heard from some of the relatives, including my 92-year-old aunt that we just got back from Texas visiting with last week, that there was a lot of security issues and activities going on, and they wanted to escape that mess and also get to the security of the United States.
Well, definitely the rising time of Mussolini and the fascism time period. So you're here, your mom and dad, immigrants from Italy, your dad works at Loblaws, and so do you. You're an alum.
I did. I came home on my 16th birthday. My father came home on my 16th birthday, and he said, "You decided not to play baseball this year." He said, "You're not in the band." He said, "You need to work." And Guy Glace, who is the manager at the Foote Avenue Loblaws store, is waiting for you down there today. He has an application for you to fill out to go to work at Loblaws. And I went to work there and worked there through into college years, and then when the chain went by the wayside, my dad went to work with Tops Markets, and I went to work for Tops Markets through my college years as well. So I started working for Guy, and then my dad was running the East 2nd Street store, where he was kind of the supermarket for the Jamestown Falcons at the time, and got to know a lot of baseball types through his store. And he came home one day and he said, "For the first time in 25 years, they're mixing up the management team. I'm going to Foote Avenue, Guy is going to 2nd Street, and Sam, you're going to be working for me until they can, in compliance with the company's nepotism rules, they can find you a spot at Guy's store down on 2nd Street. It was the hardest, worst 2 weeks of my life because my dad was a Marine sergeant in World War II in Korea and ran his stores like he was still running a Paris Island boot camp. And he had to prove to everybody in the store that his kid wasn't getting any breaks. So finally got a transfer down to 2nd Street, walked into the store, went to the office, guy reporting to duty, and gave him a hug, saying, "It's so good to see you," after the 2 weeks that I had to endure the sergeant up at Foote Avenue.
Gosh, that sounds familiar.
Yep.
So during this time period, I bet you're a card-carrying union guy, right?
I still got my withdrawal card from the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, local number 1, Utica, New York.
So there you are. You're a card-carrying union guy, experience in the grocery business. But during this time, you're going to school.
Yep.
And Jamestown Community College, right?
Jamestown Community College. I had a good start there. Wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with my life. Actually, when I decided that I was not going to be the shortstop for the New York Yankees, and I was no longer going to be a pitcher following in the footsteps of one of my all-time heroes at the time, number 41 for the New York Mets. I was a closeted Mets fan in a Yankee house for a period of time. But trying to figure out what I was going to do, so I enrolled at JCC. Went to JCC, and cute little story, in addition to getting a good education and some great internship opportunities, I walked into an English lit class my 2nd semester, and this girl with a Falconer cheerleading jacket walked in, sat in the seat in front of me, and I looked around the room, and it was me and 23 other women in this class. And the Falconer girl sitting in front of me, and I looked around the room and I said, "I think I'll marry that one." And I did. And we just celebrated our 38th wedding anniversary. And from there I went on and received my bachelor's.
For the record, it was Becky Peterson.
Becky Peterson, no relation. And you have a sister, Becky Peterson,
Absolutely.
right? But Becky Peterson from Falconer. And from there I went on to UB and received my bachelor's. She went on to Buff State to get her bachelor's degree in education, and I think my decision to go to UB was largely driven by the fact as to where she was going to school. So we were right across town from each other, and then after UB, I was originally going to go to law school, signed up for the LSATs, and decided not to take them, and went and received my master's in public administration from the State University of New York at Albany, Rockefeller College of Public Affairs. So that's my educational background, and then ultimately was in the PhD program there and had a full-time teaching assistantship at Albany, full-time position. And Becky, in the meantime, had finished her master's degree, came back to Jamestown, got a teaching position in the Jamestown district, and we had the talk. So what's going on here? You staying out in Albany? You coming back to Jamestown? Where are we going to be? And so I ultimately left, came back and got a $15,000 a year grants writing position in the city's Department of Development under then Director of Development Kurt Johnson and Mayor Steve Carlson.
So here you are. That was your entree into the public sector.
Right.
You enjoyed baseball like all of us. So
Right.
tell me a little bit about your baseball career.
Very, very non-impressive. So, Little League, Babe Ruth League, early high school, and then I decided there was really no need for a 5'6" pitcher with a 78-mile-an-hour fastball. Had a good breaking ball, had a good slider, but the game quickly outgrew me. And early high school, it came to me that as my good friend Jim Adamczak got up at home plate against me one day at Roseland Park, and I threw him one of my patented curveballs that seemed to fool everybody else. Jim got a load of that, and it went out over Fluvanna, and I think it's still traveling somewhere around the world, circling in outer space. Jim was a real baseball player. I was a wannabe, and decided my next career stop is I wanted to go into the media, and I wanted to be what would be today Joe Buck. I wanted to be the play-by-play man for the New York Yankees, and that didn't work out either. But ultimately, I always had an interest in public affairs and policy and politics. My family jokes that I was born the day after the first Kennedy-Nixon debate in 1960. My mom went into labor with me during the televised debate and refused to leave the house and go to the hospital until she saw her boy Jack Kennedy perform in that debate. Went to the hospital after that, and I was born the next morning. So
No kidding.
that's where I got my interest in politics.
Yeah.
So.
Was your dad interested? Was he involved in politics?
No, not really. He was a slave to his business. He was a company man. He was interested, and he voted, and he followed it. But my mom was the real one that had interest. And when I was a young child, I had developed some health issues, developed type 1 diabetes at the age of 8. And so there was some time that I spent at home with my mom recovering from some things, and could sit all day long at the kitchen table listening to her tell stories about the Civil War, Lincoln. She was a history scholar, the Great Depression, FDR, World War II, Truman. She was a Truman fanatic and a JFK, and used to just sit there at her knee at the table listening to her while she went about her business, tell political stories and history stories. So that's where I developed my interest. Dad was always a business guy. He retired from Tops, and he was 68, 69 years old, and one night I got a call from him, and he said, "Sam, what do you think if I actually went forward and did it?" And I said, "Great, Dad, I'll support you. What is it that you want to do?" And he said, "Steve Carlson and Joe Nelbone is retiring from the county legislature. They've been working on me to run for the county legislature for Joe's seat." He said, "Would I have your support, and can we do it as a team?" And I said, "You got it." So he went on to serve 8 terms in the legislature. So he actually developed his interest in that later on in life, and didn't bring a political perspective. He brought a average, everyday guy's perspective and a working man's perspective and a business perspective to the legislature.
Clearly an influence on you on many fronts. Did he have an interest in sports?
Oh, he was huge Cleveland Browns fan, Jimmy Brown fan. We all switched over to the Bills after the Bills came into the NFL after the merger in 1970, and was diehard New York Yankees fan. Joe DiMaggio, Scooter, Mickey Mantle, you know, the whole 9 yards. And I had no choice but to be a New York Yankees fan, being raised in that house. And as I said before, I was a closeted Mets fan for a couple of years, equal to the Yankees, and because of Tom Seaver, number 41. I fell in love with Tom Seaver, and that's another thing that I realized in my high school years. I did not have any chance of developing a 98-mile-an-hour rising fastball that would mow down the best of them. But Tom Seaver was my guy there for a while.
Did he ever take you to the ballpark?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. His connection with Loblaw, as I mentioned before, was kind of like the supermarket of the Jamestown Falcons. They'd all go in there. My dad said that he used to treat them like they were major leaguers in the store. One, because those guys were only getting paid $50 to $100 a month, and not with the conditions that they're dealing with today. So he used to take care of them at the store, number one, to make sure that there wasn't any shoplifting going on, because he befriended them all. And number two, as he used to joke, he said, you never know when one of these guys may hit the big leagues. He said, we may want to have a friend there, but he used to take care of them pretty well. You know, they'd get dented cans of soup or broken packages of cookies and crackers, and he'd take care of the ball players. And he also had some other sports notables that came into his store that he became good friends with. I don't know if you remember an American League umpire named Lou DeMuro.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my dad and him became friends, and I got to meet Lou DeMuro. I'm not sure what the connection was. I think maybe Lou, because back then the umpires as well as the players had to supplement their income.
Absolutely.
And I think Lou was repping for a company at that time in the off season. And so I got to meet and know Lou DeMuro a little bit before he passed away tragically in the early 80s. There was also a guy, former major league player, called Grover Deacon Jones.
He was the coach for many years of the White Sox.
He played a couple years for the White Sox, and then he was in the scouting bureau for the White Sox. And, you know, I got, you know, his business card and little gifts every now and then from Deacon Jones. There was a guy for the Cleveland Browns. He was a all-pro starting tackle, a guy named Dick Shafraft. Remember Shafraft? My dad came to know him a little bit, and so we went to the ballpark one night when Shafraft was in town. I think he was a food service rep, because NFL players had to supplement their income as well, and came and did an autograph session for his company at then College Stadium. So I got to meet Dick Shafraft, and yeah, so he was a big fan. Got to meet.
Boy, I have one of those autographs. I was one of those kids.
I do too. Remember Walt Reniak?
I do. Yeah.
Dad became acquainted with and friends with Walt Reniak through the store, and then also one day, you and I have talked about this before, but he came home and he had a Jamestown Falcons hat. It was 1972. I was 11 years old at the time and playing Little League Baseball. And he said, Larry wanted you to have this. Larry Parrish, third baseman for the Jamestown Falcons, drafted by the Expos, went on with the Expos and the Texas Rangers, and a stellar career. And so it was 1993. Larry managed the Niagara Falls Rapids to the New York Penn League Championship. And then the story about how the Expos left Jamestown, the Rapids came to Jamestown, and Larry Parrish was supposed to be the manager of what then became the Jamestown Jammers in '94. So I went home digging through my parents' house for that Larry Parrish cap because I wanted to show him, you know, how he touched my life. And as fate would have it, you know, guys having their old baseball card collection going out in a household sale, we never could find the Larry Parrish cap from 1972. So yeah, my dad, just a natural interest in baseball and sports in general, but also he had an opportunity to be part, in his own little way, the whole Falcon story of the 60s and the early 70s.
So we now know your dad's had a keen interest, and certainly was through business and otherwise, went to the ballpark, and you were tagging along as a young kid.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself in the city government, working for the Department of Development, Kurt Johnson, and stadium improvements always was an issue.
Was.
And did that get landed on your desk?
Even before that, Steve Carlson appointed me to a vacancy on the city's Parks, Recreation, and Conservation Commission. And Russ Dietrich can fill in more of these blanks because he was a parks director at the time. A guy named Jim Taminia got appointed to a seat on the city council to replace then 7th Ward Councilman Carl Basili, who died in an airplane crash. And so Jim was appointed to the council. His vacancy on the Parks Commission opened up. I was 17 years old. Steve waited a month until I turned 18 and appointed me to Jim's vacancy on the Parks Commission. And I set out at that point in time because I had a thing for the deteriorating, at that time, College Stadium, and made it my mission to be the squawk box. And I think I annoyed Russ Dietrich because I kept bringing it up at Parks Commission meetings.
It's around 1978, right?
Yeah, right, absolutely, 1978. I just graduated high school, first session at JCC, and totally infuriated and alienated what became one of my life's best friends, Steve Carlson, on the issue of College Stadium. Well, he then ultimately made up with me enough and then gave me a job in the Department of Development, he and Kurt. And then I think largely waited long enough, I used to kid him all the time about this, waited long enough until he stepped out in front of the issue and put together a couple $1 million bond issue to totally rebuild the grandstand and build new offices and restroom facilities and concession facilities with the outbuilding that is there at the entrance to the facility in 1984 and 1985. So the stadium started to come back into good stead and condition under Steve, and I became Director of Development in 1988 after the shocking and untimely death of our good friend Kurt Johnson at the time, and continued to try to find ways to help Steve to get money to make other upgrades. And it was largely because of the work that Steve and Russ did. And I was just a little cheerleader on the outskirts and a guy that had to help him find a few extra bucks here and there, largely because we had a market that had proven itself over the years. The Expos were successful through no fault of our own, wound up, as we talked about, in Burlington. A knowledgeable fan base here. Good owners out of Buffalo with the Rich Group that decided to come here, and also a fairly reasonably well-kept, updated ballpark. But I give the real credit to Steve Carlson and Russ Dietrich for bringing that up to speed, and then later on, after I became mayor, to simply put the building blocks on top of what they already saved and built down there.
Were there standards back in the late 70s, early 80s? I'm aware of it later on in life, but were there at that time that you had to deal with, or was it just you were looking at a facility that was just plain not up to code?
There were no standards at the time. I think that came with one of the later player development agreements between Major League Baseball and the Players Association. And the Players Association starting to look at their younger guys coming up and becoming major league players, wanting to have them in good, safe, quality facilities at the lower level. And they wound up putting together those standards. I believe it was in the early 90s. It was called the Gould-Evans Report, after a company, I think, from Kansas City that Major League Baseball hired to put together standards not only for major league ballparks, but for the minor league ballparks at every level. And they varied from AAA, AA, long season A, standard A, short season A, rookie league. It all depended on the level of the ballpark. But back in the 80s, when we were starting to work on the stadium, no. And what we basically did is I picked up the phone and I called my friends Rod Drake and Bob Arnone at Habitera Associates at the time, local architectural firm. And Rod, because he worked at the Department of Development as a landscape architect and knew him from there, they came in and they, with their own research, put together their own standards and helped us devise the plan for what the stadium is basically still today.
Now there's aspects of the stadium, and I know you've talked about it, that date back to 1941, which was the original construction. Can we talk about that?
May 5th, 1941. closed school and had a parade from downtown Jamestown to Falconer Street to open up the stadium. Built at a cost of $63,000 in 1940, 1941. The Village of Falconer, one of your great clients, actually donated $3,000 at the time towards the cost of building the stadium on Falconer Street. Jamestown Police Benevolent Association donated and built the fence, but there's only one remaining original component of that stadium. It's all been rebuilt and replaced, in some cases, on several instances, over and over again, since 1941, and the only original component that, actually there's two original components that remain in effect today, actually three. Number one, the dimensions of the park. Number two, the 1940s looking light standards, field light standards. And number three is the original steel for the superstructure of the grandstand. Everything else has been rebuilt or replaced on multiple occasions. So they took basically what was a decent, good design. As a former pitcher, I love that ballpark because it was a pitcher's ballpark, not a lot of home runs built down there. And they built a very good quality facility that stands the test of time. And the guys at Habitera were able to build off of that. And every project that has happened subsequently has built on top of that.
The actual dimensions, maybe it's just idle chatter of the ballpark itself. The urban legend is there's more square footage, if you will, between the foul lines than most any stadium in the country.
It's true.
Yeah,
that's true. You've got it's like 335 down, which is pretty typical. You know, that 320 to 330 range for major league ballparks. Down the left field line, I think it's 335 at Dietrich Park. Down the right field line, I think it's 342. You've got deep center at 417, and you got power alleys that pitchers love and hitters hate there. So yeah, it's larger than your typical ballpark anywhere. The only thing that would rival it was, you know, the real old-time parks, you know, like Forbes Field or the Polo Grounds or those places that went on forever.
yeah.
And some of them didn't even have fences back in the old days. So
as things progress and all of a sudden standards come into play, now that's an extraordinary pressure because that's part of the contract between major leagues and minor leagues that the franchise location must meet standards.
right.
So do you recall meeting with kind of the standards people, the Gould people, and how to kind of work with that?
On many occasions, and they would issue a 5-year report update because the standards would improve and adjust every 5 years. And as director of development and then as mayor, I'd get the Gould Evans report every 5 years sent to every city with a professional club. And we would have to address those items in accordance with our owner and the parent organization, the major league parent. And then there were certain things that they would receive. Gould Evans, who was the vendor for Major League Baseball, of hardship cases of things, and then would grant waivers for certain things, but would hold the standard hard on other things. We would receive a waiver every year because our press box on the roof of College Stadium, now Dietrich Park, is not handicap accessible. And it was outrageously expensive and crazy to build an elevator to the roof. So we would receive a waiver, as did Pilot Field and now Coca-Cola Field or Salen's Field would receive waivers for certain things that were not practical for them to do in Buffalo and every ballpark. So we'd have to evaluate those every few years and put together a plan to meet standard. And like I said before, they came on board in the early 1990s, And the first time we had to grapple with those was after the Expos made the decision to leave and the Riches decided to bring Niagara Falls here with a Tigers affiliate.
Let's talk about that quick, because you were in the middle of it, as was I, the phone call. And the phone call came from Bill Giesel, who was corporate counsel for Buffalo on a Sunday morning.
And a law partner friend of yours in Buffalo.
He said, hey, heads up, this is what's happening, and which then led to a call from me to you, which then led to a series of things happening that Sunday, and then either the Monday or Tuesday thereafter, John Dandy's coming down to meet with the three candidates who were running for mayor at that time.
Right.
Jim Timinia, Carolyn Seymour, and I think Dick Kimball maybe.
Correct.
And you were part of that. Mike there?
Mike Bellani was there, and Bob and Mindy were on a conference call hookup.
Yeah. Talk about the conversation.
Well, first of all, just so I can tell everybody out there, the call came from 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning from Greg Peterson. And you ruined my day basically telling me the Ray Pecor Burlington story, and however, we might be able to take this bucket of lemons and turn it into a good-sized pitcher of lemonade. And then you were nice enough, I was director of development at the time, to bring me into the mix. We met with John Dandies and Mike Bellani. I'm not sure that Mike Buchkowski from Buffalo, that ultimately became the general manager of the Bisons, was in the mix at that point in time. And we had a three-way mayor's race going on in 1993, as you alluded to. Carolyn Seymour, who was my boss at the time, was running for re-election after she lost her Democratic primary to Councilman Jim Timinia. And Dick Kimball, who was the Republican candidate at the time, also a city council member. And I had the job to basically bring the three of them together, who I was all on, reasonably to excellent terms with, and met with them all individually, saying that we're going to have to spend some money because we've got these new Gould Evans standards out. We're going to have to come up with a workable lease where these guys can cover their expenses and hopefully make a buck or two along the way, not profiteer, but make a buck or two. And nobody, namely Bob and Mindy Rich, because they've got options. And none of you want to be the mayoral candidate that presided over not only the loss of professional baseball here, but were the political reasons for us not replacing them. And it's unheard of these days that you lose a team. Once you lose a professional team, you're done these days. We got a golden opportunity here. Mm-hmm. And by the way, this would be the second.
For the camera, the Riches' interest is they had a franchise in Niagara Falls, which was tenuous.
Right.
That was the other.
With a stadium that needed upgrades, and another one of the reasons why they liked it, the option here, was Bill Giesel's law partner, Greg Peterson from Phillips, Lytle, Hitchcock, Blaine, and Huber. Did I get it right?
Yeah,
okay.
Wow.
And they instantly, as everybody does, falls in love with Russ Dietrich. And they had, and this goes back to Steve Carlson and Russ Dietrich, a facility that was in reasonably good condition, needed modest investment to get up to the new Gould Evans standards, and they didn't want it blown apart by turning baseball into a political football here in town during an election season. So I met individually with all three, and then I met with them as a group just before you guys showed up at the mayor's office. You and Russ came in, and then the boys from Buffalo, as I like to call them, came in, and then we got Bob and Mindy on the phone, and everybody did their part. And I think, they didn't announce it that day, but I think that they made their decision that day.
Yeah, it was a remarkable, and I know you well orchestrated it for the benefit of the Riches, and they asked the right questions, very good questions. Yep. And John and Mike were there to make sure that it was real, because they were looking at eyes the whole time. And John, not very demonstrative. He holds his cards so close to his chest. And that was a great phone call. And you're right. nobody knew for sure.
Right.
And we could and Bellani has, and Dandy's filled in the rest of that story, what was going on with the mayor, Jake, what was the name of the mayor?
Jake Polillo from Niagara Falls.
Jake Polillo, yeah. Anyways, a whole lot of things going on, which ultimately they wanted to make sure it was Jake's ultimate call, but they could walk away knowing that they could take the franchise elsewhere. So they had everything in the back pocket.
Do you remember a famous New York Daily News headline from 1975, Ford to New York City, drop dead?
Yeah.
That's basically what Jake Polillo said to the Rich Entertainment Group about improvements to Sal Magley Stadium. You want to do improvements to Sal Magley Stadium? Here you go pay for it. You guys are a Fortune 500 company, you're millionaires, pay for it. Well, I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back. They wanted to be in Niagara Falls. It was a good fit for them, but they had to have a facility that the following year could meet the Gould Evans standards that were just coming out. We were within reach. They refused, and I don't even think they were talking about building a new ballpark at the time. They wanted improvements, and Niagara Falls wouldn't do it. And so we not only had to get control of the political environment and then get the business community and the baseball community ready to accept this new team, which, as you know, and our good friend Randy Anderson knows, and David Muley knows, was the second minor league professional team that we wound up getting from the city of Niagara Falls. So our original Jamestown Falcons came from Niagara Falls, but we had a lot of work to do, and then we had to figure out, how we were going to meet the Gould Evans standards and come up with the money to do that, and there's good stories about that too. So.
Well, just to complete the week that was the week that was. It started on a Sunday and ended on a Friday, with ultimately a lease signing.
Right.
At home plate. As I recall, at least it was at the park. But you had to work a little bit with the city itself, so it wasn't just the mayor signing it.
I got to tell you though, just one quick Mike Bellani story.
Sure.
It was the day. It was decision day because while I think the decision was made during the phone conference, they were going to go back and they were going to try to take one last shot at Niagara Falls, and they were told to drop dead. Later in the week, it was, like you said, better part of a week until we got the announcement. And I was on the phone with Mike Bellani several times during that week. What's going on? Because, we need to visit with Niagara Falls first. It's going to happen. It's going to happen, Sam. It's going to happen. It's all good. And so it came to, I think it was a Friday afternoon. And I couldn't get even a holler back from Mike Friday. Now it's after lunch. And I was told, no, we're meeting with Niagara Falls Friday morning. And then we're going to come to Jamestown, and I need you to pull together the press conference with the mayor and the city council and get all the folks together and the media. And Dandies and I are going to come down. We're going to make the announcement once we got everything set in Niagara Falls. Well, now it's getting on to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. None of the arrangements have been made. And I'm trying to reach Bellani and can't get a hold of him. And finally, I get a call from Bellani middle of the afternoon. And he says, let's go for 5 o'clock. I said, have you left Buffalo? He says, well, we're still got to talk to the mayor in Niagara Falls. And okay, half an hour later, I get another call from Bellani. It's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he says, we're on the road. We're on our way. Finally, we're just leaving Niagara Falls. And I hear in the background, Bellani says, where are we now? And I hear in the background somebody says, Casadega. They had made the decision. They already delivered the news the day before in Niagara Falls. And Bellani was calling me saying, we're just leaving Niagara Falls now. They were already in Casadega. And so everything worked out well.
Now you got the Gould Evans report, and now you've got to deliver.
Right? Because we didn't have any money. We needed, in comparison to Niagara Falls and a lot of other places, to be Gould-Evans compliant, we still had $700,000-800,000 of investments that we needed to make in essential type of stuff, lighting upgrades and field improvements, clubhouse improvements, because even though they were relatively new, there needed to be updates. So yeah, we were looking at about $800,000, and we didn't have that type of money. And as far as the city council and the mayoral candidates go, they were all prepped prior to the press conference. Everybody was in agreement. Nobody wanted to have their hands dirty on this, and basically said, fine, whatever we need for stadium improvements, he said, your job, go get the money. Well, fortunately, there were a lot of other cities in New York State, AAA, AA, New York Penn League was basically all New York State cities at the time. None of them met the Gould-Evans standards. The only one that came close was Buffalo, and they probably had it 85-90% covered. There needed to be money put together. So a guy named Bob Julian, who was the president of the New York Penn League, worked through with Bellani and Dandies the transfer of the franchise from Niagara Falls to Jamestown. And I never knew that I was working with somebody who you and I came to know very well later on in another chapter of Jamestown baseball history, because he left his New York Penn League. He's an attorney out of Utica, and left the New York Penn League when he got elected to the state Supreme Court out in Oneida County. And so he disappeared off the baseball map. Fast forward, came back as the commissioner of the Perfect Game Collegiate Baseball League. And so Bob Julian and Mike Bellani, and to me, I was just a little foot soldier carrying water. I was director of development still at the time. And they were working the political angles in Albany to avoid the carnage of New York State losing all these professional baseball teams because the cities couldn't afford to build new ballparks or update the existing ones. And ultimately, Governor Mario Cuomo, Lieutenant Governor Stan Lundeen, the State Assembly, the Senate, put together a multi-million-dollar grant program that cities with professional teams in the state could apply for grants from the New York State Urban Development Corporation with a match requirement that they would accept either cash or in kind. And we ultimately wound up being one of the first recipients of a grant. There was about a $400,000 grant at the time that we had to match in 1994, 1995-ish. But there was a caveat to that. You could not be a city with ballpark improvements necessary and apply to this fund if the professional team playing in that stadium moved from another New York State city to play in that ballpark that was going to be improved. Yeah. You needed to get permission from the New York State city that was losing the ball team for you to apply for the grant funding. So were we going to get a letter from the city of Niagara Falls after they just lost their second franchise to Jamestown in 40-some years? And doubtful. Well, my boss at the time, Dick Kimball, said, you know what? He says, I met Jake on a couple of occasions. He says, he's an incoming Republican mayor. I'm an incoming Republican mayor. I'll give him a call, see what I can do to break the ice. He wouldn't even take Dick's calls. And I said, you know what? I said, believe it or not, I know Jake's twin brother, John. He used to live in Brockton. Jake's a Republican. John was a Democratic hack banging around years. He was a deputy DMV commissioner under Hugh Carey. And now he's his brother's parks commissioner in Niagara Falls. I'll give John a call. Now, we caught up with each other. We had nice conversations. Sammy, I'll take care of you. I'll get my brother to sign the letter, sign the letter, sign the letter. Nothing. Finally comes down, the application is sitting at the State Urban Development Corporation for their board meeting for approval of all these grants, and I still don't have the letter from Niagara Falls. And I finally get, the meeting was at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. I finally get a call from John Polillo, Jake's brother, and he says, my brother's gonna sign the letter for you. You got access to a fax machine? Here it is, 1994. And I said, well, we do, over in the congressional office across the street. So I called Pat Kinney and I said, working for Stan Lundeen at the time, and I said, I got to send a fax to you from the State Urban Development Corporation. And she says, no problem. You know, Stan was very instrumental in getting this fund put together as lieutenant governor. And so I get a call from Pat. She said, your fax came in. I ran across the street. I grabbed the fax, read it, and then immediately put it on the fax machine back to the Urban Development Corporation in New York City. Got there in time. The grant was approved, but the letter merely said this: the City of Niagara Falls does not object to the City of Jamestown applying for these funds, and it was signed J. Polillo on the signature block. To this day, we don't know whether it was Mayor Jake Polillo or his twin brother John Polillo that signed the letter, and it went into New York. We wound up getting the grant from the state. Make a long story short, we did the $800,000 of improvements, and the Jammers were here and happy and spent 21 years in Jamestown.
During that time period, we know about that call, you know, the call that came from me, basically, call from Giesel to me, to you, and then ultimately the calls with the Riches. But that's not the end of your call world.
No. I had a devastating day in late 2014. There had been rumors coming out of Pittsburgh media that the Pirates had struck a deal with Morgantown, West Virginia. They were building a new stadium on the campus, or not on the campus, but for the use of West Virginia University. It was going to be shared like the State College facility is shared between the State College Spikes of the New York Penn League and the Penn State Division I baseball team. And they'd struck a deal between the city of Morgantown, the county down there, the state, and the university, and the Pirates, and that Jamestown would be moving to Morgantown. And John Dandies and I are still good friends to this date and had a wonderful working relationship, but he was not going to level with me. I was mayor at that time as to what the heck was going on. And so it was a Friday afternoon. My secretary, Leanne, came in just before lunch and she said, Sam, John Dandies is on the phone. I said, great, give me the call. Why isn't he not calling me on my cell phone? He always calls me on my cell phone. He said, I don't know, he called the office here. And I said, well, put it through. He said, no, he doesn't want to talk to you. He's on his way to Jamestown and wants to know if you can meet him at the ballpark. I instantly knew what was happening there. And so I hightailed it down there. Usually we went out to lunch someplace. Usually he'd call me on my cell phone from his cell phone, so I knew what was happening. I went to the stadium. He was there with Matt Dreher, the general manager, and I came in and sat down. He looked at Matt. Matt very studiously got up and left, just the two of us all by ourselves. And he says, I hate to do this to you. I said, you don't need to say another word. He said, we got to make the move. He said, and there's going to be a press conference in Morgantown, he said, at 5 o'clock today. He said, Bob and Mindy are going to be there. It's all going to be good for Jamestown. We will make sure that we profusely thank you and the city and everybody else, and Russ and Greg and everybody else for what you've done. We didn't want to do this, he says, but it's It's economics. We have a new $20-some million stadium down there with luxury suites and 6,000 seats. It's actually a AA stadium. You guys can't compete, and we're not going to ask you to. He says, we're making the move. Besides, Bob and Mindy have got a hunting cabin down there, and it's just a natural fit, the same way it was 21 years earlier. So now in reverse fashion, I get back to the office. You know, I'm crying my eyes out, and I put together my baseball cabinet and called you. Turnabout's fair play here. You gave me bad news. I called, gave you bad news, and I said, don't tell Russ. I said, I want to tell Russ in person. So we quickly staged a meeting in my conference room for 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon as the press conference was about ready to get rolling down in Morgantown. And if my memory serves me correctly, it was you, it was me, it was Russ. I think Randy Sweeney was there at the time. Randy Anderson may have been there at the time, a couple of my staff people, and I had to break the news, and I felt so bad for Russ because it was like his whole world had been sucked out of his body. Hour later, after everything was done, I went back into my office, and my desk was just cluttered with phone messages. Sporting News, all the Pittsburgh media, all the Buffalo media, Baseball America. They were all contacting, wanting to comment for me. Hey, how do you feel losing a professional baseball team that you'll probably never get back? Because the world had changed even more. I took all those phone messages from out of town, I threw them in the garbage, and the only ones that I returned was to our friend Scott Kinberg at the Post-Journal, and then to Terry Frank at WJTN. And but then there was a bunch of other messages, and all these people that were interested in bringing baseball teams to Jamestown to fill the void. None of them were major league affiliated organizations. I had the owner of the Washington Wild Things from the Frontier League, which is an upper level independent league, probably at the AA level, said that he owned a second franchise. His one in Washington, Pennsylvania was too successful and valuable, but he had another weak one that he was interested in bringing here. And a whole bunch of wood bat league, collegiate summer wood bat league teams, a couple of others that had delusions about starting their own independent leagues and so forth. And I held off over the weekend to start returning those phone calls, and then put you guys together as basically a kitchen cabinet to kind of wade through all of this. But I just got to tell you this one, and you know the story. It was about 5:30 by the time I got through all that stuff. And I was ready to go home. I was tired. We were going to the high school football game that night, and I was tired. And just as I was ready to leave the office, my private line rang on my phone. I says, who the heck is this? And I looked at it, and it was an Ohio number on it. And so I picked it up and I said, who's this? And he says, Mayor, how the heck are you? I says, who is this? And he says, Kevin Romberg. And I said, who? He says, Kevin Romberg. He says, I've got a summer collegiate team in Lorain, Ohio. Would you be interested in having it in Jamestown? Make a long story short, we hooked up, we met with him. We ultimately went with Kevin Romberg, a former major league player for the Cleveland Indians, short career, an investor buddy of his, an attorney from Cleveland, Bob Shanowski, was the money man. And Kevin's baseball buddy and sidekick, Super Joe Charbonneau, the rookie of the year in 1980 for the Cleveland Indians, and the next edition of the Jamestown Jammers were born because that day at the stadium, Dandies and I worked out a deal that, much like the old Cleveland Browns, they would work with us to assign the the rights to the name Jammers over to us, turned over anything that they had that was of value, and Dandy's indicated that he was going to honor the last year of the lease, but ultimately I talked him into donating an even bigger amount to the Bucks for Baseball Fund at the Community Foundation for stadium improvements. So we made some lemonade out of those lemons as well.
And that was an interesting year. I mean, so many stories, but one of the fun things we had at the Jackson Center, where I interviewed Kevin Romberg and Joe Charbonneau together. And yes, they talked about the upcoming season, which was all 10 minutes, get that out of the way. And those two characters.
Oh God, that was incredible.
For those who want to watch some really good humor, that is the night, because they both had quirks.
They're Abbott and Costello baseball versions. So.
Charbonneau and Romberg. Oh my God! But then that led to that franchise being sold shortly thereafter to Zimmerman.
Right. But before that happened, I got to tell you a quick Romberg-Charbonneau story.
Sure.
They invited me out to breakfast one morning at Phil and Cindy's in the East 2nd Street Plaza, down next to where my dad's store used to be. So we had a nice breakfast together. The two of them were going out, and we're going to be doing things around town and meeting people. And as we were walking out of Phil and Cindy's, guy gets out of a car that I know well, son of a good friend of mine growing up, my friend Ned Barone. His son, Anthony Barone, gets out of the car, and Anthony, what are you doing here? He says, well, I'm on a break. I said, you doing the baseball thing anymore? And here's Romberg and Charbonneau standing there. And he says, well, no. He said, I coached in Wellsville in the New York Collegiate League this past summer. He said, went out to California for a while, came back. He says, I'm a phys ed instructor at the GA home up at Lutheran. And so I introduced the three of them together, and Charbonneau and Romberg leave, and Anthony and I are standing out in front of, I said, are you interested in getting back into the game? He says, my family would probably kill me if I walked away from a steady job to, why, what's going on? I said, those two guys you just met, do you know who they are? I said, they're former Cleveland Indian players. Anthony was young at the time when they were in baseball. I said, one was Joe Charbonneau, the Rookie of the Year in 1980, Kevin Romberg, the owner of the baseball team here in Jamestown. Would you be interested in me introducing you to them as a possible manager for the ball team? Yeah. So we got them all together. Kevin took an instant liking, fell in love with Anthony, and Anthony ultimately signed on to become the manager until the Milwaukee guys bought out the team, and we're here for a few years, and then Anthony is still out doing great work for them in Milwaukee.
I remember you telling that story, but it's a great, great story. And yeah, Anthony was, I think, our manager for maybe 2 or 3 years, maybe. Championships, a couple of those years, and then moved his way to Milwaukee Milkmen.
Yep, and then won the championship there last year, I think it was, or the year before.
Yeah, yep. And this year got down to the 7th game of the championship before they lost.
Yep, he's got a future ahead of him in baseball, a bright one, I think. So.
But you also got a call related to that. Not only a call at one point saying Romberg telling you that, hey, they're just introducing Mike Zimmerman. Mike Zimmerman comes here. Dan Kenzie comes here. Interesting people. And they won a championship under Anthony Barone in
2018.
2018, yep. Take it from there.
2018, which is 25 years, almost to the day, that I received a call from you about the Expos. I had to place a call to you that we were losing baseball again. My wife and I, Becky and I, took a vacation in late September, a fall vacation. We wound up in Bar Harbor, Maine. Beautiful day in Bar Harbor. She and I were having an ice cream cone on the rocks down near the ocean. My cell phone rings down by the ocean. It's Dan Kenzie. And he says, Mayor, he says, I got to tell you, I've got some bad news. He said, you've probably heard the rumors and they're true. It was like the John Dandy's conversation all over again. And he says, we've got we've got to move on out, he said. And we got a couple of buyers for the team. He says, unfortunately, neither one of them is interested or is going to keep it in Jamestown. We feel terrible because you guys have been wonderful. And so I'm still in a state of shock, even though I knew this was coming. And I said, no problem, Dan. I said, you guys have been great to work with. And then all of a sudden, my mind cleared enough, remembering you and I kind of having musing conversations in the past, because I think secretly we've both kind of would have loved to own a professional baseball team of our own at some point in time. And you bringing an idea to me, hey, wouldn't it be interesting, if we went to Bob and Mindy or we went to somebody and had them donate the team, and we set up a not-for-profit corporation and give them a tax write-off for the value of the donation to the community. And that instantly popped into mind. And I thought, what the heck, let's go for broke here. I said, I'm going to tell you something that you're probably going to laugh off. So I threw that idea out to him. Would you be willing to donate the team? Dan, how much the value of the team? What are you going to get for it? He says, I don't know, probably between $60,000 and $80,000. And the thought was the team was either going to wind up in Ithaca or Cortland. And the reason why is the lead candidate to buy the team was the owner of the Elmira Pioneers, as well as the Elmira hockey team. So I pitched him the Greg Peterson idea, and I said, are you going to start laughing at me now? And he says, no. He says, I'm having dinner with Mike Zimmerman, the owner, tonight. He says, I think Mike might have an interest in that because it's not the money that means everything to him. He says, let me get back to you tomorrow. So I immediately started dialing you on the phone, and it might have been one of the instances where you were actually practicing law that afternoon and couldn't take my call. And you weren't either doing baseball or Jackson Center stuff. You were doing business stuff at the time. And then you and I finally hooked up later that night. I was still in Bar Harbor. Next day I got a call from Dan Kenzie saying, Mike and I talked about it over dinner tonight. He loves the idea. He says the condition is, he says that you guys have to set up a corporation. He said, and he will make the gift if it's properly endowed, and if you can get the approval from the league on the new ownership group. And he said, and Mike's not even interested in the tax write-off. Keep the tax write-off. He'll donate it over to you. Much like what Dandy's did before in 1994, they donated everything Jammers to us, and the birth of Jamestown Community Baseball LLC, with the group that you largely put together with investors and a board and our secret weapon honorary chairman of the board of directors, Russ Dietrich. And then we got a hold of Bob Julian, at that point in time retired from the bench, practicing law again, and also had become the president and commissioner and legal counsel for the Perfect Game Collegiate Baseball League. Bob came to Jamestown. We met with him at the Jackson Center, and it didn't hurt that at the time, I don't know if you planned this, I don't think you did, but it certainly could have been, but we were having a Senator Charlie Goodell exhibit going on at the Jackson Center.
Total dumb luck, but yeah.
And Bob Julian was a college intern for Senator Charlie Goodell at the time in 1970 when he was running his election campaign for Senate, and was a huge Charlie Goodell fan and was totally mesmerized by the exhibit that you guys had put together. Next day, we'd worked it all out that evening. Next day, we had a press conference at the stadium.
With Anthony.
With Anthony. Yep. Anthony Barone, representing the Rock Incorporated, because he had gone to work for them at that point in time out in Milwaukee, and Bob Julian, and we announced the birth of at the time, the new Jamestown Jammers later on to be rebranded now our beloved Tarp Skunks. So great stories, great memories, but that call on the rocks in 2018 was almost 25 years to the date that you called me in September of 1993. And instead of you bearing the bad news that time, I had to bear the bad news to you at the time, but it all worked out in the end.
To the community's credit, just for the record, many phone calls thereafter, a little bit making sure that we delivered what we thought we could deliver, but we're not short.
Right.
At least over 40 members of our community have stepped forward and financially contributed, and that's remarkable.
Well, the thing that I want to make clear to everybody that may be within earshot or watching this at some point in time is all those investors that you put together and all that money that they paid and you put together, not a penny of it went out of town to the Rock Incorporated, the previous owners of the team. Okay, so nobody profiteered off of this. The league actually, for our first couple of years, waived our league entry fee and our dues fee, so none of it went out of town, and all that money that was raised stayed in Jamestown basically to become the working capital for the business organization that was put together that retained the services of local people to run the team and advertising accounts and vendor accounts with largely almost exclusively local businesses. And that money has stayed here in town building not only another business, but building part of what I consider to be an important segment of the quality of life infrastructure in this community. One of the many, many things that makes this place worthwhile to reside and to invest and do business.
Actually, I'm going to use that in the next investment pitch. Well, it is, it is Jamestown Community Baseball LLC. And
right.
The title tells it all with regards to the response to keep something which is a community asset of which nobody has been a stronger advocate than you. And that's just many, many years of that, from days of college to now that even though retired from public life, you're still involved with this community baseball, and a man of many ideas and all good.
Make sure when you come out to your next Tarp Skunks game in 2023 next year, you understand how important this is to the community and is touching and changing the lives of a lot of people.
Speaking of changing the lives of a lot of people, there are always been highlights at the games that you and I have attended. Is there one or two games that you say, that was a game for the ages?
Yep. 2 years ago, went on forever, and with an exciting, finish at the end.
He's safe, and the Tarp Skunks win. I walk up, wild pitch, 9 to 8 and 10 innings. Oh my goodness! Santa Maria! Wow! Oh my goodness! What a way to end a ball game! Oh my goodness! It looked like Bailey was going to fall, be tagged out. The man that had the ball, that was Shed. Shed didn't get a hold of it. Bailey was able to creep on home, and the fans are going to be going home ecstatic. Wow! I can't say anything else. Wow! No, that was the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen in my life. Point blank period, that was the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
But maybe one of the lasting, most enduring Dietrich Park moments in my mind, two of them actually. One was in 1994. It came to the end of the season. You know exactly where I'm going with this.
That was mine too.
It was a sellout, a legitimate sellout, no freebie tickets. It was a a playoff play-in game, I think it was,
Play-in
right?
game.
Play-in game. We were playing Batavia. Packed house. All of the Buffalo baseball royalty were in Jamestown with Bob and Mindy that night. It was electric, with basically a walk-off, fan photo finish ending with the place going crazy. I know that you've got the video, so you may want to be introducing it at this point when you put this package all together. That was one of them that I will go to my maker with remembering, and it meant a lot that night. And I was sitting 2 rows, I was director of development at the time, sitting 2 rows behind Bob and Mindy, and I got a high five from Bob and a hug from Mindy, which was always a good thing. So,
Photographer, where he's never here when we need him. There he is!
The show will be coming up in just a very few minutes.
and then the second one was and you and I had our fingerprints on this one too. It was in 1998, and we decided we wanted to do something. There was talk about selling the naming rights for College Stadium at the time, and that was a crazy notion. It wasn't going to yield any. And you and I kind of kicked around the notion, let's do something to honor Russ Dietrich. So you went out and did your magic, shaking the tin can and coming up with some money so the city didn't have to come up with any dollars, and redid the signs at the stadium, and put in the message board out in front. And I'm not sure if we ever really did keep it entirely a secret from Russ or not, but
You went on and they did not know.
right. And I had to work with the mayor, and I was director of development then as well, and the city council, and got them all to agree, because it was Mayor Kimball's idea to go out and raise $5,000 a year for naming rights. And I said, let's do something that's going to really mean something to the community. And quite frankly, there would be no professional baseball in Jamestown had not Russ Dietrich stepped up and with money out of his own pocket put together a local investor group back in the 60s, and then covering losses at the end of the year out of his parks director's salary. I said there wouldn't have been any stadium upgrades under Russ and Steve had not baseball been saved by Russ. I said the reason we've got a facility down there like we do and that we still got Major League Ball is Russ Dietrich. This needs to be Dietrich Stadium, whatever. We had a little committee. We used to meet at the Holiday Inn for breakfast, and we ultimately decided that the name needed to be Dietrich Park because of Russ's synonymous lifelong affiliation with the parks system in Jamestown. And then what we ultimately did is we created a special voting session of the city council at the ballpark before the game on a Saturday night, and we came up with some ruse for Russ to be there. The signs were all covered up out in front of the stadium, and Russ came, and the city council all comes out on the field, and I was the mayor's representative that night. They called the city council meeting to order. They read the pre-filed resolution, and that night officially changed the name from Jamestown Municipal Stadium, because College Stadium had always been an unofficial name. Changed it from Jamestown Municipal Stadium from 1941 to Russell E. Dietrich Jr. park, and we were careful to have the junior in there because Russ has always said, there's only one Russ Dietrich.
Yeah.
I'm junior. And watching Russ break down in tears.
I'm breaking down.
I am too. So, and then the next day in the paper, front page of the paper, iconic picture, Russ with his head in his hands, crying at that moment. But I think he was a little smarter than us, and he never let on, maybe that he really realized it. I don't know, but what do you think?
I don't think he did, but if he did, he hit it really well. It was Babe Ruth. It was a Babe Ruth event, so the players were there.
Yeah.
So that was the ruse, to get everybody together.
Right.
So, I mean, that I remember, the timing was that relationship. So there was confusion. I mean, Russ Dietrich being the chairman of the Babe Ruth World Series Committee, all of that stuff, and it's normal that the city would do something, but not that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and for anybody that goes down to the stadium, you'll notice because baseball's been a big part of the history of that ballpark in Jamestown. It's the reason we have two logos up on the message board out there. One was the logo of the Jammers, now the Tarp Skunks, and on the other side you have Babe Ruth baseball logo out there. And that was another way to pay homage and tribute to Russ for everything that he's done from a baseball standpoint over the years.
Anything else I should ask you? I mean, you knew you were coming over here today. You knew we were going to talk baseball. And is there a question I should be asking, or a moment that we've missed?
I think that we have totally fatigued anybody that gets into this. We probably lost the audience about 45 minutes ago. But what do you say we go to lunch?
I like that. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Sam.
Yep.